Welcome, everybody, to the very first episode of the Super I/O podcast, where we cover emerging trends in I/O, discuss new research and articles, and much more. My name is John Paz, and alongside me are my fellow I/O bros, Carlos Manzano and Yusuf Nadreem. Today, we're excited to welcome our very first guest. He helped inspire the Super I/O Bros community. We know him as a former professor. Most know him as the program director at FIU's Masters in I/O Psychology program and the CEO of JFR Consulting. Please welcome Dr. Jose F. Rodriguez.
All right, thank you, everybody. How you doing? Thank you for having me, and appreciate that the inspiration. That I didn't know I'm such an inspiration. That's wonderful.
Yes, big inspiration. Definitely the main reason why we started this whole LinkedIn community.
Wonderful.
Yeah. And speaking of starting, we have a little warm-up question for you.
Sure.
How did you figure out that consulting was the right career path for you, and what experiences, people, or moments inspired or motivated that decision?
Well, it's funny. So I do a little bit of consulting on the side, and before I got this job, I was actually thinking about going into it like full force, as my career, right? And changing my career really. But I still do some consulting. I could probably do a little bit more. What got me into it, I think, really it was kind of by accident. I think with a lot of things in life, it's by accident. You prepare as much as you can, but then so much of it is also, are you in the right place at the right time? Did you meet the right people? So I remember it was 2019, I think, or 2018 PsyOp. I graduated in 2018 with my Ph.D. And as soon as I graduated, one of the times I went to PsyOp, the Society for Industrial Organizational Psychology, their annual conference. I've been going regularly, but I went with the mind frame of a student. And then at that point, I started to go with the mind frame of I wanted to get into consulting. I wanted to see what consulting was all about. I wanted to see, where did I fit in to the whole thing? And so I got to meet some people, and I went and I made an effort to really go to sessions where there was going to be more practitioners and kind of like moving a little bit away from the research stuff. So I met a gentleman who's over at UCF, and he was, I think, adjunct faculty at the time. And he had his own company, Talent Metrics, I think. If you guys want to speak with him at some point, I'm more than happy to make the connection. So I met him a couple times actually at PsyOp, and we just clicked. And then he had come to Miami. Since he's in Orlando, he came down to Miami, and we chit-chatted, We just kind of got to know each other a little bit, but nothing. We exchanged LinkedIn accounts, and nothing really more came of it until this is 2018, 2019, so then 2020 hits, right? And the pandemic hits. We're all at home and that jazz. And so I get a message from him, and he's like, "Hey, Jose, would you be interested in, helping out? I have a friend who needs someone who is bilingual to do some trainings in Spanish." And I said, "Yeah, sure. Totally up my alley." So I reached out, we made the connection, and, she gave me some work, and, we negotiated, the price and stuff and whatnot. Like, they had already developed the training. All I had to do was deliver it. So, I did it for her a few times. And then I remember one of the times that I reached out to her, I said, "Hey, I can do a lot more than just these trainings in Spanish. I can do other things as well." So I kind of gave her a little bit of info about my background. And so she said, "Well, I think this is 2021, I believe." And she said, "Well, there's an opportunity to go to New York that, we don't have anybody here to do this. And it would be, I think, once a month for like 6 months doing a leadership training." And so little by little, more work. And then one time at a networking event that I went to, I ended up meeting someone who I ended up getting some work with as well. And so I did some additional little side jobs on my own. But I haven't really done a whole lot because I do have a full-time job as a professor that takes up a lot of time. And it's funny, I kind of actually rediscovered my interest in being in academia. And I do love consulting. I do love the ability to get to travel, to get to meet with clients, to meet new people, to meet people in a number of different industries. And I think that's the fun part of seeing people in all these different walks of life. But I'm definitely not as immersed in it as I could be. The problem is that then that would mean more travel. That would mean more of my time kind of being taken up, devoted to that. So I'm kind of trying to balance the two right now. And the one that wins out a bit is the academic side, the teaching side.
Yeah. And speaking of teaching, being a director of the program for the masters, here's a question geared to that. When you review applicants, what three KSAOs most reliably predict success in IO? And what concrete evidence convinces you they're real? Like any red flags, any recent red flags you've figured out as of late?
That's a really good question, and it's hard to have concrete evidence because the application process, I mean, there's not a whole lot in. It's funny in higher education, in IO in general, we talk a lot about like, selection methods and all the various kinds of selection methods and what is more. But then when it comes to practice, it gets difficult to be like, oh, we could do this personality test, we can do this test or that test. For example, one of the biggest tests that has really lost a lot of its cachet is the GRE. The GRE, you could argue, is a cognitive ability test. And we know that cognitive ability tests are pretty decent predictors, not the only predictor, they're decent predictors. One of the things that I introduced, I believe it was after your cohort, because when your cohort came in, I was still new to the position. One of the things I did differently is I included a work sample because, work samples do have some pretty good predictive validity when it comes to performance. And I think, okay, why not also give the students a chance to see a little bit about what they can expect in the program, and also give me an idea of like where are their maybe their weak points. Maybe I don't know like who's going to succeed, but at least I can tell like who seems to have like the ability to be able to learn and grow and do better, right? And who just kind of like really just didn't put it together for it, and probably doesn't seem to have the stamina, for putting up with the program, because it's a lot of work. It's a lot, as you know. So I think it worked out. Dr. Reeves and I had like a little my co-instructor, we had like I want to say we had a rating scale. I don't remember right now if we rated it or not, but at the very least we had some dimensions that we were looking at, right, in terms of how the students did. How is it turning out? Like, what are some of those knowledge, skills, and abilities, and how does it play out now in the classroom? I think it's hard to gauge, because even though a student, I mean, grades sometimes are and sometimes are not a predictor. Like sometimes they'll get a good grade in something, and then when you get them in grad school, you still see them kind of suffering and struggling in something that's like, well, wait, you got a good grade in this. Why are you struggling in it, right? I'm not trying to say that people cheated or anything like that, but I think that it's different in undergrad when maybe the standards are a little bit different than in graduate school, so that maybe the A or the B or whatever grade it was in undergrad isn't a very good indicator of how they'll do in grad school, because fundamentally it's a different, even though it's the same topic, it's a much more different level of the topic, and that matters, So I would say that in terms of like, what have I been able to find out like about that? I think their interview is also important. We do interview the students, especially those who we kind of feel that we can't really kind of get a good gauge of where they're at from their work sample, from their essays, from their introductory video. So we'll follow up with an interview. We actually interviewed quite a few of our applicants this year. There were not as many who we said, oh, you don't need an interview. We want you in, or we don't really think this is, good quality. So we interviewed quite a bit. And I think in the interview, we get a better sense of, how might they react to, for example, uncertainty. There's a lot of uncertainty in the stuff. You're not given a whole lot of instructions. So, what are some examples of moments in which you didn't have a whole lot of instruction? Like, what did you do? Like, talk to me a little bit about like, what would you do? So I found that those things have kind of helped out. But in terms of, hard evidence, it's kind of hard, because, I mean, if you get admitted into the program, we're going to do everything we can to make sure that you get through it and that you get out. It's very rare that a student is unable to complete the program. And if they're unable to complete it, it's usually something very egregious, very kind of like, something that usually they did, or that they didn't do, that would force them out of the program.
From your first cohort, your first complete cohort with us, and
Mhm.
your most recent cohorts, what's a similarity you would say between the KSAOs? Like, what is something you see kind of? Everybody is different. Nobody is
Mhm.
the same, but what is something you feel like kind of gives the it factor to somebody aspiring to be an IO psychologist?
I would say what's similar right now, and I hope it's evolved. I think it's evolved with a lot of them is getting over the being afraid of statistics. Getting over being afraid of the numbers and the formulas and stuff like that. Because I mean, I guarantee that there is that just a little bit of knowledge on our side, looks gargantuan next to somebody who doesn't know a damn thing about any of the statistics. I mean, not even like minuscule. So I have seen not in all not in all the students, but I have seen in some of the students um, a a move in terms of they're not so afraid of the stats anymore. They're much more willing to engage with it. In fact, there's a few who are in internships that have been doing some statistical analyses type things, and it's not too sophisticated. It's just okay. So we've got some data on performance. We've got some data on whatever, right? So thinking about something simple like a correlation or an effect size or a t-test or whatever, now we can say, oh look, there is a difference between group A and group B, or there is a training that seems to be effective, or the survey results, or whatever it might be, right? So I've been hearing from those who are in internship right now who had, and even they had told me, I want to go into a more stats kind of an area because I want to really kind of get over this. I really want to learn. I really want to be able to grow. And I've been seeing that. I think with your group too, there was that desire to improve.
Yeah, there was. Yusuf, you ready?
Yeah, so Dr. Rodriguez, since you've completed both a master's and a PhD in IO, do you think you could walk us through some of the pros and cons of pursuing a master's instead of a PhD?
Right. So everything has its pros and cons, right? So there's no the word, I love this word, panacea. There's no perfect fix for everything. It's you got to take the good with the bad. And the thing about a master's that I would say is a pro, let's say for example, is that typically most masters now. So keep in mind, my master's is not terminal like yours. The program that I oversee is called a terminal master's degree, meaning that there is no expectation, nor is there any training to move a person into then a PhD. The whole idea is that you get this master's to go then to work. In the case of, and that was the case of my first master's, which was actually in education. It was a terminal master's degree in education, and I was working in higher education. When I got this degree, the second degree, or the second master's, I should say, it came along the way towards getting a PhD. But pros of getting just the master's, I think, are several. I think you can, if what you want to do is work and go into, the workforce, it sets you up for that right away. Given whatever the conditions of the labor market might be at the time, right? I mean, that's a factor that has to be taken into account. Just because a person has a piece of paper, a degree, a credential, doesn't necessarily mean that the job market itself, the labor force is ready to absorb you. These things are multi-layered and multi-dependent. So if one wants to work, if one wants to, really start applying, really start, kind of, being more in that practical kind of field area and start moving around, I think the master's is going to be a really good choice. The PhD is, I think, also a good choice for those who want something deeper, those who want something more enriching. I mean, oftentimes I've said in class, okay, but if you really want to learn more, then you have to go to the PhD because, like, we'll talk just enough about something to understand it. It's the difference between being the service advisor at an auto shop versus being the head mechanic. You know what I mean? Like if you, or even just being a low level mechanic, like you might know how to do an oil change, you might know how to change a spark plug, but any kind of major work on the car is going to have to be left to somebody with more experience who has more specific knowledge. And that's like with the PhD, like there's certain things in certain organizations that a master's education will have a ceiling as to how much you understand or know or what to do. I'm thinking of things like psychometrics, things like maybe developing tests, really like setting out and doing major kind of research training initiatives, things that involve a lot more depth of knowledge, breadth of knowledge, that a PhD would give you that. And, frankly, having that nerd factor, like if you're just kind of nerdy like I am and you like to read about a lot of different things, you like to learn a lot about a lot of different things, the PhD would be probably a good route. And that's okay if that's not your cup of tea. Not everybody is driven by that. Like I said, individual differences. Everyone has, their what floats their boat. So, if your idea of a good time is not reading a book, then maybe the PhD might not be a good choice. Does it make more money? It's a big fat it depends. I make more money now because I've also been in my career longer, right? So I've had a chance to move around. I would not have gotten any of the opportunities I think that I have had without my PhD. Maybe some of it with the master's, but it brings a lot of cachet for me, right? Having the PhD. There are some folks that I've spoken with when in a consulting role that they sometimes like minimize their PhD. They don't really I kind of lean into it a little bit, hey, I'm a professor, that's like my first job, but also I do this, so I find that clients generally like that when I approach it as like this is a learning experience and I'm someone who's experienced with the learning process. So.
Awesome. And do you think, given some of these differences and today's job market, which path do you think you would choose right now and why?
I always knew I wanted to get a PhD ever since I was like 17. I realized, oh, wow, I really love this thing called psychology. I really love, I got into college and I tried to learn everything I could. Funny enough, back at that time, I didn't really care for IO. I was more into clinical. Social, personality, all those aspects, especially social psychology. I had a real interest in social psychology, but and clinical psychology. But so I focused a lot on that. I think if I were to do it all over again, I probably would do it. I would probably do the same thing. It was not a walk in the park. It was not easy by any stretch of the imagination. Frankly, I wouldn't want to do it all over again. I would, once is enough. But I don't think I would necessarily change anything. I think one of the things that I wish I could have spent a little bit more time on was learning languages, and doing more of that. I love languages. I'm fluent in Spanish. I'm conversational in French. I would have liked to have picked up maybe a couple more languages if I would have had more time, or been better, had better managed my time, I guess I should say. Because I think I probably had the time. I just never, really bothered to think about, let me go ahead and explore that and do more of that.
Awesome. And John, are you ready?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask one more question. This isn't my question, but I'm just intrigued. So you mentioned how like kind of meeting that ceiling when you have the master's degree. Would you say going back for a PhD is probably only necessary for those who already have a master's once you get to that ceiling? Or would you say maybe to kind of transition to a different organization once you reach that ceiling? Because okay,
I think I don't think that you necessarily. The PhD is a big commitment. It's a lot of sacrifice. It's a lot of time. It's not something to be taken lightly. You don't just wake up one day like, oh, you know what? Why not? That sounds like fun. Let me just do a PhD. No, it is a lot of. It's not fun. It is a lot of pain. But when you hit a ceiling, it depends on what kind of ceiling it is, right? Like if it's a promotional ceiling, then maybe you might need to be looking at another organization, right? I don't think that you need another degree. If it's a learning ceiling, then maybe it might be looking into certifications, right? Do you really need a doctorate degree in order to do what you want to do, or do you just need to get certified maybe in some other areas to help broaden, what your repertoire of tools of whatever, right? But if what you really want to do is contribute to the body of knowledge, to conduct research, to really sink your teeth into statistics and really do more, then probably a PhD would be then the right route. It's just a matter of degree, I think, in terms of like what degree of ceiling have we hit here? Have we hit, like, I feel like I'm stagnated, then maybe it means like going to another organization. Do I feel like I can grow, but I just haven't learned enough? Well, maybe, I don't know, maybe doing some additional continuing education. I don't know that a PhD will solve all of the answers. It may not. So it's one of those things you have to be really, really thoughtful about.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you wear two hats as a professor and a practicing consultant. So I imagine you think of the program a bit like a product with clear deliverables. What are the non-negotiables you built in to make sure students become strong practitioners? Which tools, lessons, or projects have the longest shelf life for them in the field, and why?
Can you repeat that last part? Sorry.
It's a two-parter. So give
me the first part.
What are the non-negotiables that you've built into the program that you think allow students to become like the strongest practitioners they can be? And then with tools, statistics. Okay, so
you have to know a little bit of statistics. You have to know some research methods. You have to know about test development, about scale development. This is where we bring in added value. This is what differentiates us from your very typical run-of-the-mill, HR degree, right? What an HR person kind of does versus what value added that we have. I mean, frankly, HR, they don't learn that. They're not taught that. They don't know those kinds of things, right? How do we develop a survey that is going to be both reliable and valid? How do we develop a performance management system, performance appraisal system from that management system? How do we develop training that's going to be effective and really, move the needle? How do we measure culture? How do we measure, right? All those things that we talk about in psychology, that these constructs, right? That thinking like a scientist is what really sets us apart, rather than going with what's the latest fad, what's the latest TikTok, trend, and not seeing that, okay, hold on a second, this might not actually bring any value to our organization, right? Like, how do I make this kind of value proposition in terms of what is going to be not just monetarily, right, in terms of dollars and cents, but also in terms of these other aspects of the job, which is more than just, the firm making money. Duh, right? But there's more to life than that, and looking at it from the psychological perspective, I think helps us to understand the human in human resources, which often I think is not really quite focused on enough.
Mm-hmm.
What was the second part?
The second part was which tools, lessons, or projects have the longest shelf life for them in the field, and why?
I don't know that any one tool has a very long shelf life. I think that you have to think about the changing sands, right? The shifting sands and the changing conditions. Mm-hmm. What worked in the past may not always work in the future, because the workplace is changing. Humans don't change, right? We haven't evolved all that much, I think we're still kind of who we are. But work itself, the nature of work has changed or is changing. And I think anybody who says they know exactly where it's going to head, and even with all this AI crap, I don't know. In one moment, I'm reading that AI is going to be getting rid of all these jobs. Another place, I'm reading that companies don't even know how to implement AI. And another one, I'm reading that, AI is running out of data. You know what I mean? So it's hard to predict and to prognosticate, to forecast this future, because look at what happened. You guys wouldn't know about this because you were either too young or not born. When the internet bubble of 2000, right? You have to go back 25 years to see anything that's remotely close to what we're experiencing right now with the, what's going to stick around. We thought that in 1999 that the internet was going to revolutionize the world. That in the year 2000, it was all going to be the internet. And then this thing called the internet bubble burst, right? The investment bubble. People started to realize these companies have nothing to show for. There's all this investment, but yet they have nothing to show for. So that's kind of like where, investment started to lag, and then things went bust. So I think that we're in that place right now too. So what has lasting power? I would say understanding psychological theory, right? Understanding human motivation. Those things don't really change all that much. We all still have this hierarchy of needs, right? That no matter where we are, we're going to have a need to belong, right? That's the nature of what it means to be human. Social support is always something that's important. Interpersonal relations is always going to be something that's important. As much as somebody says to themselves, I don't care what people think about me. Yeah, you do. We all care to a certain degree about what people think about us. So I would say understanding those fundamental aspects of what it means to be human, then in how the world of work is changing for the better or for the worse, right? And then seeing how we navigate that. To me, that's the staying power.
Mm-hmm. So like those foundational columns, just kind of
I would say those
greater
foundational
understanding,
ideas. Yeah,
better
yeah.
understanding of all of that. Okay. And then all the fads, not getting hung
The
up on.
performance appraisal systems will change.
Yeah.
We have a 360. Okay, cool. But then now we have, cameras that are going to be watching us. Now we have, keystrokes that how many times we've been on the typewriter, right? There's different methodologies that'll come about, right? But I think at the end of the day, you still have to ask yourself, is autonomy something that the employee treasures? And more likely than not, the answer is yes. We like to kind of be left alone. I don't like to have somebody over my shoulder, telling me what to do every 5 seconds.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so continuing to harp on the classroom client dynamic, they're both very different audiences, but with somewhat similar goals when it comes to educating and teaching proper practice. I was curious if there's anything you've learned from your time as in the consulting world that you've transferred over to your teaching approach and vice versa.
I think all the time. I think they're symbiotic. I think the differences are fewer and far between than we let on. I think part of it is, yes, the context, right? In an organization, the context of training is different than in a graduate level master's class, right? However, I think in both cases, what we're trying to do is to elevate the conversation, is to elevate the thought processes, right? To get us to scratch beneath the surface, to try to really understand the causal mechanisms and what is my role, right? And how can I apply this? So I don't hold back in trainings. Depending on the level of training and who I'm training with, I might do a little bit more explanation as I'm talking about something, whereas in other training sessions, I might kind of, or I'll ask, do you understand what that means? In a classroom setting, I might flip back and forth a little bit between the things. I want to see, did the students read the material? Do they understand what's going on? And then, so it's actually, I would argue that there's less difference than what would appear at first glance. I've learned, I think, quite a bit about how to present information, how to talk about certain topics, how to read the room, and a lot of my style is similar in both. I try to be, and I think what people appreciate about me as a presenter is my authenticity, that I try just to kind of like be myself, In the classroom, it is a little different. I do cuss a lot more. But because you don't know your audience in an organizational setting. I mean, what can students do, right? No. But I think that there's some research to actually show that when a person does, cuss, it does kind of like, it does show some transparency, some authenticity, right? But I would say probably that's the biggest thing. I'm much more mindful of my language when I'm in a training setting. Because I think there's a lot more variability in terms of the kinds of individuals who I'm working with, right? And as I said, the context is different. I'm being hired as an outside person to provide them with, some product, which is me, right? A service. In the classroom, it's a little different too, because there's also more longer length of time that we're together, right? In consulting, typically it's in and out, in and out, in and out, in and out. Whereas in a classroom, we know we're going to be together, especially like a program like ours, which has a certain length of time that you're going to be with these people day in, day out for X number of months. In a training, even the one that was 6 months, once a month, it was still only once a month that I was seeing them, So it wasn't like I was seeing them every week, And that was one of my challenges, was getting to know their names. And having and then being able to remember everyone's name and their particular personality styles and and reaching out and saying, so what do you think about this, right? And making sure that everyone's getting involved.
So you'd say like you pretty much stay consistent through and through yourself in both aspects, and just
Yeah,
what I'm getting is like the stakes are a little bit higher on the client side, so you kind of maybe play it up a little bit more
yeah,
sophisticated.
definitely.
Okay, okay, sounds good.
Definitely. There's definitely that. I try to, get them to think. I mean, I do it everywhere, like application, right?
Mhm.
But I think in a consulting setting, application is much more front and center. Whereas in an educational setting, it's more understanding the theory, understanding the mechanisms, and understanding all that stuff, and then we can talk about application. But in a training session, it's usually like, okay, what do I do? What do I do? Right? So I try to explain that this is how the car runs. You're not going to be a mechanic, but I want you to be educated so when you go to the mechanic, you know what kind of questions to ask.
Mhm. Okay, perfect. So this question is a little bit more just strictly on the consulting side. So in retail, you often hear the terms "the customer is always correct," and as a
Yeah.
consultant, you're essentially in a customer-facing role, just with higher stakes.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, how do you walk that thin line of both trying to be accommodating to your customer or client requests while still maintaining integrity and keeping your practice rooted in evidence-based approach, without losing
Yeah.
trust of the client or coming across as pretentious and saying, "I know what you're asking me to do, but trust me, do this instead."
That's a very difficult one, and I don't think I've always been successful. I've lost clients because I've told them the truth,
Mhm.
and they want to hear the truth. They wanted to hear something else, and I said, "Nope, you can't do that with you." Like for example, there was one client. I had done interviews with everybody in the organization, kind of asking about like perceptions of leadership and perceptions of this, that, and the other. And I gave back a report to the CEO, and I said, "Okay, so here's what I found." And he basically was like, "Well, you didn't tell me anything that I didn't already know." Like, and I'm thinking in my head, "And why aren't you doing something about it then?" Like if I'm telling you what you already know, I'm corroborating, right? Like I didn't say that. I was like, well, I mean, I'm just giving you. Oh, and who said that? Who said that? I'm like, no, I'm sorry, I'm not going to tell you who said what. That is not my position to be like, oh, John said this or Carlos said that. No, 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 no. I got information from all of your employees, and here's what some of the themes were as I heard them. Okay. Now, if you claim to already know these themes and yet you're still not moving the needle on any of this stuff, well, not much more that I can do. Needless to say, I never got a call back from that client.
So it's a very thin line to cross, I would
You
assume.
win some, you lose some, but I mean, I suppose that's a question of your own integrity.
Yeah.
And I mean, SIOP, the Society for Industrial Organizational Psychology, has our ethical
Right.
guidelines, right?
Mhm.
And I think that that's a matter of your own integrity. Like, do you do whatever the client wants, jump how high, right? Or do you say jump, and I go, jumping is not appropriate right now, right? If I were
Mhm.
to jump, it would be not, you know,
Yeah.
not ethical.
It just gets to the point where like, if are you hiring me to hear what you're supposed to hear, or like just what you want to, hear,
Well,
pretty much.
that's one of the things about client relationships.
Hmm.
They don't want to hear the truth.
Hmm.
They don't want to know what's wrong because then they have to do something about it.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times what they want to hear is what they think is the
Is the
problem and the solution. And
Mhm.
what they're looking for is validation of their own diagnosis, right? Which may or may not be correct. You
Hmm.
know?
So
And I would assume it's a little bit sticky because like you kind of have to almost stroke their ego a little bit and like
Oh
let
yeah.
them down softly. Yeah,
And
that does.
I'm not very good at stroking people's egos. I mean, that's
Yeah.
just not my cup of tea.
Yeah. Why are
so
you hiring me at that point, I guess?
so on that note, Dr. Rodriguez, I know you've briefly touched upon AI, so I wanted to talk about it a little bit. So what do you think would be one specific way to see AI meaningfully improving IO work in the next 12 months? And what do you think you'd give leaders caution in implementing it?
Oh, those are good questions. I think with like for IO folk, I think with like job analysis, it's going to help us out. Not in writing the job analysis for you, because that's the problem with AI. You can't have it do the work for you. You can have it, you can feed it the information, right? Give it the data, train it, and then had it kind of say, okay, like what are the patterns that are emerging? So here's a bunch of KSAs that I discovered through my various interviews and my various critical incidences and yada, yada, yada. Put this for me into some organization, right? Put this to me into some pattern. Help me see what's in it, what's there. Help me maybe come up with some ideas for things, like if I get stuck. Maybe help me writing vignettes for role play. Maybe help me. And you have to be very careful because I've done this. I've used AI for that, and it gives you very generic kind of like the light came through the window as Carlos sat down nervously in front. I'm like, Jesus, what the hell? So I had to reword a lot of what it gave me, but I did, at least it gave me some foundational stuff that then I embellished on, right? I could have told it, hey, go back and do this. I could have interacted with it more, but I usually use AI minimally, just like, help me out, give me something, let me double check something that I thought. What are your thoughts on this? Oh, okay, that kind of, because remember, AI it's only as correct as the data that it's trained on, right? So there's that aspect of it. I think with item writing, when it comes to surveys, it can definitely help out. I think with like content analysis and looking at like, hey, like, does the content of this stuff, do these items seem to be all kind of measuring the same thing? You can kind of ask it like, hey, so, how would I reword this? How would I make this more, homogenous, right? Whatever like that. In terms of, that's where I think in some things that can be used in IO, maybe in writing summaries of the literature, right? Again, if you feed it the literature and you say, hey, what are some of the major themes, major issues that are coming out here? It can help out with that, really cut back on time. I think when it comes to cautionary tales, I think we have to be careful to use the word again, that AI is not seen as a panacea. AI is not going to solve all of your problems, right? If anything, it might create more problems. So we have to be strategic in the way that it's being used, right? And I think the problem right now with most organizations, from what I'm hearing in the news, is that no one wants to be left behind, right? Everyone is suffering from gargantuan amounts of FOMO, right? They don't want to be the ones to be left behind. So they're doing AI, and it's like, okay, but there was a recent study from MIT that suggested that some 95% of companies that the employees aren't even really using it. So is it really displacing employees? Maybe not. In an HR setting, it can definitely help with reviewing resumes. I mean, absolutely. But again, you've got to be careful. Studies have shown that AI is susceptible to all of the biases that we're susceptible to. I mean, it's crazy. Contrast effects to what do you call it? What's the one now? Damn it, it's not coming to mind. Confirmation bias, all those kinds of biases, anchoring, all that kind of stuff. That it can be susceptible to these things. And again, the data that it's being fed on, right? If it's not representative of, a wide swath of the population, if it's only kind of being fed with certain subsets of certain groups of individuals, then you're going to see certain discrepancies kind of exacerbated, right? Because it'll be like, let's say just difference between men and women. If it's not trained appropriately, it may think that if a woman who's applying for a job has a gap in her employment, right? Maybe because she had, I don't know, a child, that's going to put her that the AI is going to automatically go, nope, we're not going to look at it because there's gaps in employment. So we really have to test our assumptions. I would say what CEOs need to do is make sure that they test their assumptions before they start kind of like implementing any kind of grand scale change.
Awesome. And Carlos, I think, had a question.
Yeah, just to kind of finish up here, let's go back to the human side of it. Mm-hmm. As humans, we're always striving to improve. What are some personal or professional goals you have for the future, and how do you go about ensuring those goals are making sure they're completed and kept on pace?
Yeah, I want to retire. I don't know. No, it's interesting. Some professional goals. I think in terms of my teaching, I want to do I want to spend a little bit more time, look, and I do spend some time looking at like, what the recent trends, listening to podcasts, listening to the news, reading the news, and kind of, just trying to keep abreast of what's going on so that that I myself am not left behind, that I am aware of what's going on in the world and how it's going to affect our students potentially when they go to graduate, right? I'd like to have a little more time to do some research. So I think that's one of my goals for the future is to incorporate some research into the repertoire of like what I'm doing. Not going to be a lot, but at least a little bit, just to kind of keep those tools sharpened, if you will, with respect to the consulting, I think, right now I'm already doing it. I'm not really saying no to any, work. So I have a lot of work coming my way, a lot of trainings coming my way. I'm going to be in New York in a couple of weeks doing a two full day trainings on leadership. And I do want to get like I don't think I need to get a lot of certifications. And I've gone back and forth because when you have a PhD, I don't think you necessarily need as many certifications, right? But there are certain psychological tests, like for example, DISC, which is a personality test that they offer that if you get trained, right, and you get certified for this, you get like access to a lot of different things that you wouldn't get. Like I can interpret a DISC output and I can help somebody and coach them through it. Like I don't need a coaching certificate. I don't need a DISC certificate. But I'm thinking of maybe doing that or maybe doing strengths, just to be able to get access to some of the kind of software, right, and the behind the scenes kind of stuff that otherwise you wouldn't get access to, the Hogan I've debated. There's a bunch of personality tests out there, but I'm thinking it's time that maybe I get myself certified in one of them.
And how would you go about getting certified in one of them? Just
paying a lot of money. These things are not cheap. They can cost as little as a couple $1,000 to as much as like $11,000. It all depends on, what test it is. Something like the Hogan is very, very, very complicated. It has a lot of moving parts. You need a PhD in order to even get considered for certification to do that one. For the DISC, you don't need a PhD. A master's degree is usually sufficient, especially if you have a background in psychology. It's very easy, intuitive, and can be done. So I don't think there's any restrictions on that.
So being a wealth of knowledge that you are, what are some podcasts or articles that someone may subscribe to, just getting into the field that they want to maybe start learning and get engaged with material?
Funny enough, all the podcasts that I listen to are not IO specific, right? Because I try to also broaden the perspectives about, what is affecting us, right? And what's influencing us. So one of my big time go-to podcasts just about like the economy and what's going on in the world, especially in the market and all of that, is Prof G Markets. Prof G, Professor Galloway, is a professor at NYU, and he has a suite of different podcasts. And in this one, with his co-host, Ed, I forget what his last name is right now, but the two of them do a lot of analysis regarding and they actually just did something on AI recently, which I thought was very, very, very good. In terms of kind of like breaking things down, understand. And they're not IO psychologists. They are, I think, marketing and finance kind of people, right? The Freakonomics is a great podcast that they use actually a lot of psychology stuff. And sometimes they'll have not maybe IO psychologists, but psychologists, in the mix and talking about different kinds of issues. Like they had one that recently about the air traffic controllers and what does it take to become an air traffic controller. And so there was a lot of stuff there on the selection side, on the recruitment side, on the testing side, on all that kind of stuff. Straight up IO would be maybe Adam Grant. I mean, I like his podcast. I think he has a lot of good conversations, interesting conversations. I like some of his older stuff a little bit better when he did Work Life. That one was a little bit more straight up IO. He subsequently kind of has broadened up his conversations a bit more. I think the Psychology podcast is a good one. Again, it's not directly IO. I'm always blanking on this guy's name. I think he does a great job of covering a lot of different topics within psychology, not just IO, but that are very IO adjacent and that touch upon IO issues. The Happiness Lab with Dr. Laurie Santos is very interesting. That she has, I think, again, Sometimes it's IO-ish kind of stuff. It's about job related kind of issues, burnout, etc. Sometimes it's just about the questions of happiness writ large. And I think that they go into some interesting topics that again kind of like tangentially. Speaking of psychology is the podcast from the American Psychological Association. I think PSYOP has a podcast, but I haven't heard it. So I'm kind of bad. I have to go listen in and see what they're talking about. The Stanford Psychology podcast is also pretty good. They've had some really good kind of more general psychology conversations that I thought were very interesting, and that again were kind of like related to IO and related to some of the things that we do. So those are just some examples of some of the podcasts that I listen to. The Journal by the Wall Street Journal, that they do like a weekly or a daily, actually, excuse me, on one news topic. So yeah.
Well, thank you for your time, Dr. Rodriguez. And this is going to be the episode for today. Thank you for taking time out of your day to come with us on our first episode. And any message you want to give to the people out there in the world?
Oh man, stay hopeful, stay positive. I mean, look, everything has its cycles. Life wouldn't be life if we didn't have our ups and downs. And I think to think that everything has to be smooth and easy sailing is to forget what being human is like. And we go through a lot of different trials and tribulations, but I hope that we learn from all these things, that we grow, that we become better people.
Brilliantly said. Well, hope you have a nice rest of your day.
All right, guys, you too. Take care. Let me know.
Thank you for your time,
All right,
Dr.
guys.